Today, covering the terrifying history of Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, David Berkowitz, and Richard Ramirez, the four infamous killers who cast a long shadow over the 1970s. The 1970s was a decade drenched in fear. It was a time of change, rebellion, and uncertainty. Across America, innocence was bleeding away, replaced by the dark realization that monsters didn't lurk in forests or haunted houses. They lived next door, smiled politely, and blended seamlessly into everyday life. From coast to coast, the United States trembled under the weight of an emerging reality. The serial killer had come of age. In this grim era, four men stood out not only for their brutality, but for the cold calculation and depravity that defined them: Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, David Berkowitz, and Richard Ramirez. Each one became a symbol of a nation's terror, their names etched into the annals of human evil. Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell in Burlington, Vermont, in 1946. He grew up believing his mother was his sister and his grandparents were his parents, an early psychological wound that twisted his identity. From the outside, Bundy was charming, educated, and ambitious. He studied psychology, volunteered at crisis hotlines, and later pursued a law degree. He was the type of man who could make people feel comfortable, and that was precisely what made him so deadly. His victims were almost always young women, attractive and often resembling one another, many with long brown hair parted down the middle. Bundy's murders began in the early 1970s. Though he would later claim that his fantasies of violence started long before, he lured victims by pretending to be injured, wearing a fake cast, or asking for help loading something into his car, a Volkswagen Beetle that would later become infamous. Once a woman leaned in to help, the mask would slip and Bundy would attack, often striking them unconscious before abducting them. He murdered across multiple states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida, leaving investigators baffled by the sheer range of his crimes. The brutality of Bundy's acts was matched only by his arrogance. He played a game with police, staying one step ahead, changing his appearance, altering his name, and learning how to manipulate people with frightening ease. When he was finally caught in 1975 after a traffic stop in Utah, police found handcuffs, a ski mask, and other tools of abduction in his car. But Bundy wasn't done. He escaped custody twice, once from a courthouse in Aspen, Colorado, and later from a jail in Glenwood Springs. His second escape led to a killing spree in Florida in 1978, where he attacked several sorority sisters at Florida State University's Chi Omega House, brutally murdering two of them and severely injuring others. Bundy was eventually caught again after being pulled over by a Pensacola police officer. This time his charm couldn't save him. His trial was the first nationally televised in U.S. history, and Bundy relished the attention. He represented himself in court, flashing his trademark grin and occasionally flirting with female reporters. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bite marks, eyewitness accounts, and his own incriminating behavior sealed his fate. After a decade of appeals and manipulative confessions, Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison on January 24, 1989. When the switch was pulled, hundreds outside the prison cheered. For many, it was justice at last. For others, it was merely the closing of one horrific chapter in America's darkest decade. While Bundy terrorized the western states, another killer was burying his nightmares beneath the soil of a quiet Chicago suburb. John Wayne Gacy was born in 1942 in Chicago to a strict alcoholic father who berated him relentlessly. Gacy craved approval, yet grew up feeling worthless. By adulthood, he was a well-liked contractor and community member, the kind of man people trusted with their children. He threw neighborhood parties, volunteered in civic organizations, and even performed at local events as Pogo the Clown, a cheerful persona that masked an abyss of depravity. But beneath that painted smile lay a predator. Gacy's charm and community involvement made him invisible to suspicion. Young boys and teenage men would disappear after accepting work offers from Gacy's contracting business. Their families would wait by the phone, hoping for calls that never came. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy lured at least 33 victims to his home. There, he handcuffed them under the guise of a magic trick, sexually assaulted them, and strangled them with a tourniquet. He buried 29 of them beneath the crawl space of his house, stacking the bodies like grim trophies, while others were dumped in nearby rivers. For years, Police dismissed missing persons reports as runaway cases, unaware that the predator was living quietly among them. Gacy's downfall began in December 1978, when 15-year-old Robert Peast vanished after telling his mother he was going to see a contractor about a job. The contractor was Gacy. When police searched his home, the stench of decay was unmistakable. Over several days of excavation, officers uncovered body after body. A nightmare made real. Gacy eventually confessed, coldly describing his victims as just kids who got lost. At his 1980 trial, Gacy was found guilty of 33 murders and sentenced to death. His arrogance never faded. He maintained his innocence to the end, insisting he was the victim of a conspiracy. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. His last words, "Kiss my ass," reflected the contempt he had for justice itself. His crimes haunted Chicago for decades, and his Pogo the Clown persona became an enduring symbol of horror, a grotesque reminder that evil often wears a smiling face. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the country, New York City was trapped in the grip of fear. It was the summer of 1976 when the first shots rang out. A young couple, Donna Lauria and Jody Valenti, were sitting in a car in the Bronx when a man approached and fired several bullets, killing Donna instantly. It seemed random until it happened again and again. Over the next year, 6 people would die and 7 others would be wounded by a mysterious gunman who called himself Son of Sam. He targeted couples in parked cars, often using a .44 caliber bulldog revolver. Panic swept the city. Young lovers stayed home. Women cut their hair short to avoid matching the victims' descriptions, and New York newspapers blared headlines about the faceless killer haunting the night. David Berkowitz, the man behind the terror, was born Richard David Falco in 1953. Adopted as an infant, he grew up feeling abandoned and angry. By his 20s, he was isolated, consumed by dark fantasies and resentment. He later claimed that demons spoke to him through his neighbor's dog, commanding him to kill. Whether he truly believed it or used it as an excuse for his crimes remains uncertain, but the madness he unleashed was real. He taunted police and journalists with letters filled with bizarre ramblings and cryptic symbols. In one note to the press, he declared, "I am a monster. I am the son of Sam." The city descended into paranoia. Every police officer was on high alert and millions of people lived in dread. When the killer finally slipped up, it was almost mundane. A parking ticket led detectives to his car. Inside were maps of crime scenes, guns, and ammunition. On August 10, 1977, officers surrounded Berkowitz's Yonkers apartment. When they approached, he greeted them calmly. "Well, you got me." During his trial, Berkowitz showed little remorse. He was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, later claiming to have found religion in prison and calling himself Son of Hope. Whether redemption is possible for a man who terrorized an entire city remains debatable. His crimes left scars not just on his victims' families, but on New York's collective psyche. The Son of Sam had proven that terror could thrive in the heart of the world's greatest city. While the 1970s were ending, another killer was just beginning to take shape. A man whose cruelty and sadism would make him one of the most feared murderers in American history. Richard Ramirez, born in El Paso, Texas in 1960, grew up in a world soaked in violence. His father was abusive, and his cousin, a Vietnam veteran, showed him graphic photographs of women he had tortured and killed during the war. That early exposure to death and perversion shaped Ramirez's psyche. By adolescence, he was addicted to drugs, obsessed with Satanism, and already committing burglaries. In the mid-1970s, Ramirez moved to California, where he began his killing spree. Unlike Bundy or Gacy, he had no specific victim type. Men, women, children, and no one was safe. He entered homes at night, earning him the nickname the Night Stalker. He raped, tortured, and murdered without mercy, often leaving satanic symbols at his crime scenes. His methods were random and unpredictable. He might shoot one victim, stab another, bludgeon a third, or strangle them. What unified his crimes was the sheer sadistic pleasure he seemed to derive from terrorizing his victims before killing them. Los Angeles became a city of locked doors and sleepless nights. People bought new locks, dogs, and guns. The media frenzy only fueled the panic. When police finally matched fingerprints from a stolen car to Ramirez, his photograph was released to the public. The result was immediate. On August 31, 1985, in East Los Angeles, A group of civilians recognized him, chased him down, and beat him until the police arrived. The nightmare was over, but the horror of his crimes had only begun to unfold. At his trial, Ramirez smirked at victims' families, flashing a pentagram drawn on his hand and shouting, "Hail Satan!" He showed no remorse and reveled in his notoriety. In 1989, he was convicted of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to death, though he would die of cancer in 2013 while still on death row. Ramirez was the embodiment of chaos, unrepentant, unholy, and utterly devoid of empathy. The 1970s produced these monsters not by accident, but as reflections of a society in flux. The decade was marked by mistrust, disillusionment, and social change. Vietnam had shattered faith in authority, Watergate had exposed corruption, and the counterculture movement had redefined morality. Amid this turbulence, men like Bundy, Gacy, Berkowitz, and Ramirez thrived in the cracks of civilization, exploiting freedom, anonymity, and apathy. They walked among people who believed evil could be recognized by appearance or status. Yet each one proved that the most frightening predators often look ordinary. Bundy, with his charisma, showed that intelligence and charm could mask sadism. Gacy, the clown, revealed how darkness hides in plain sight. Berkowitz, the son of Sam, illustrated how delusion and loneliness can twist into violence. Ramirez, the Night Stalker, embodied the chaos of pure evil. Together, they became symbols of a decade haunted by its own reflection. A society learning too late that monsters are not born from the supernatural, but from the human condition itself. When the 1980s dawned, America was forever changed. The FBI began to develop behavioral profiling to understand such killers, forensic science advanced rapidly, and the public's awareness of serial murder deepened. Yet even with progress, the shadows cast by those 4 men still linger. Their stories are retold in books, films, and documentaries, not to glorify them, but to remind us of what humanity is capable of when empathy disappears. Bundy's smile, Gacy's clown makeup, Berkowitz's cryptic letters, and Ramirez's satanic grin, each is an image burned into the collective nightmare of modern history. The 1970s will always be remembered not just for disco and revolution, but for the terror that crept into suburban homes and city streets. It was a decade that forced America to confront a terrifying truth. Evil does not come from monsters and fairy tales, but from ordinary men who walk unnoticed among us.